our panel, and we already agreed that Lukashenko will have to go. So this could be the end of our discussion. But actually the main focus of our discussion is on the social and also on the international conditions of the development in Belarus. So it seems to be a deadlock now between Lukashenko on the one side and the protest movement on the other side. And to analyze the development, I think it's necessary to have a closer look at the circumstances, at the conditions in the Belarusian society and at the international conditions. And we have three participants in our panel, and this is Dr. Vyacheslav Yarashevich. He's associate professor at the Belarusian State University. His research focus is on political economy and on international relations. He has published a book on the political economy of Belarus and another book about the transformation. Since March 2019, he is Humboldt Fellow at the LMU. The second speaker will be Petra Styko. Petra Styko is professor at the LMU Institute for Political Science. She has a research focus on the comparison of political systems in East Central Europe and Eurasia. And among her numerous publications are the book State and Economy in Russia and another book comparing political systems. The third speaker should have been Janohei Playerman, the founder of the Minsk Dialogue, who cannot come actually, and we are very happy that Dr. Sirkan Bohdan will participate in our discussion. He's research associate and lecturer and member of the Center for Global History at the Freie Universität. He worked as a journalist and political analyst in think tanks and also in different academic institutions in Eastern Europe. He holds a doctoral degree from the University of Vilnius, actually the Humanities University in Vilnius, and his dissertation is about the role of post-Soviet nations in modernization of the Iranian...
Sorry for interrupting you, but I have to interrupt you. I was thrown out of European Humanities University in Vilnius.
Yeah.
A very brilliant case of, so to say, interest in democratization industries that we have in Eastern Europe. And my doctoral degree I could only get from Freie Universität Berlin, because I was denied this opportunity at the European Humanities University in Vilnius. So.
I didn't know that. Thank you for giving these informations. The first speaker will be Vyacheslav Yarashevich, and we will have short statements about 8 to 10 minutes. Please, the floor is yours, Vyacheslav.
Thank you very much, Professor Schulze-Wessel. Thank you, everyone, for joining this discussion, and thank you, the organizers, for inviting me to speak. And it's a privilege to be the first one, so I'll try to be brief and interesting at the same time. Talking about the conditions in Belarus, the circumstances of the deadlock what we have, it is necessary to take into account both sides, basically. On the one hand, we have protesters, but on the other hand, we have the authorities, the regime, as the protesters call them, and many observers, which has been there since 1994. And it's very important because it's not 1, 2, or 10 years, it's a quarter of a century. And what we have now is actually not something new for many of those who follow developments in Belarus. and who lived through these developments, like myself. What is new actually is that the extent of the protest, of course, we haven't seen the numbers we saw this year. We haven't seen this kind of reaction that we saw, and we haven't seen this to be so persistent. It used to be short. It used to be a few hours, a few days, a few weeks maybe, but we didn't have it for a few months. And now it looks like we're going to have it for at least half a year, maybe more. But that's only what we see, like a tip of the iceberg, basically, of the political economy iceberg. The big thing is beneath the water. And this big thing is the social and economic conditions of Belarus as a very peculiar case of post-communism, of post-communist transformation. I mean, Belarus used to be a part of the Soviet Union, and from being like one of the least developed areas in the former Soviet Union in between the wars, and from being one of the most devastated territories during the war, it arose to be one of the most industrialized republics shortly before the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. And that is a very important context to keep in mind when analyzing what's going on in Belarus now. Because unlike many other ex-Soviet republics and some other Eastern European post-communist countries, Belarus is still a highly industrialized, but a Soviet-type industrialized state, and it's very little in terms of privatization that took place in Belarus. It is maybe like an outcast for some, but the situation is that around 70% of Belarus GDP is still produced in a public or quasi-public sector. When we talk about private sector in its Western sense, it's about a third. Some even put it lower, like a quarter of GDP. And that's a very important observation. Belarus under Lukashenko didn't experience privatization other countries experienced, including Belarus' most important ally, which is Russia. Because Belarus is the only post-Soviet, post-communist country which is in a very close formal union with Russia, which is called the Union State. And Belarus is also a founding member of the Eurasian Economic Union, which is of a union of 5 countries. But Belarus was, I think, the first one to reintegrate with Russia starting from early 1995. And what we have in terms of the developments now, actually, the roots are in the same year, 1995, when Lukashenko, who came to power in 1994, quickly ran into the wall of not understanding the political system and trying to overthrow it. So I think the idea of having a constitutional overthrow, or what was called referendum, came somewhere in that year, 1995. And it actually happened in 1996 with the new constitution and with the new legislative bodies, and a lot of protest, of course, but then that was 25 years ago nearly, and that's very important. When it comes to living standards, the issue of living standards, I mean, Belarus managed to do quite well until at least the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. And many reasons for that, partly because of the continued strong state participation in the economy. The economy was Soviet, and it continued to be run as Soviet economy in strict terms. But then there was also a very important external factor, which is the demand from Russia, which is still the main market for Belarus industry and for Belarus agriculture. and also the main source of finance. When it comes to external emergency financial support, at the end of the day, Russia always can be seen as a partner who helps with money when no one else wants to help, and that's very important. So when it comes to living standards, Lukashenko could for the long time boast not that bad and actually relatively better performance compared to other countries. And from 1996 to 2000 and I think 14, Belarus recorded uninterrupted economic growth at an average level of some 6%. It stopped growing only 5 years ago. And I think this is one of the key reasons why we see these protests now so different from what we saw in previous years. The last time we could see something like that was actually 10 years ago. It was a different context. It was shortly after the financial crisis, but still before Crimea takeover by Russia and before many other developments in the region. So what we see now, I think, in pure economic terms, is this reaction to the lost decade. For the last 10 years, Belarus managed to see only GDP growth of on average 1 or 1.5%, which is very low, not just by common sense, by regional standards. So I think I should stop here and let the audience contemplate a little bit on the economic background. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vyacheslav. I have one technical remark to the audience. If you have questions, please use the chat. You can write your questions into the chat, and we will then organize the discussion at the end. We will open the floor. So the next speaker is Petra Stuko.
So, hello everybody. I'm a political scientist, and for me, as a political scientist, the scope and the persistence of the Belarusian protest movement has been a surprise. Statistics tell us that authoritarian regimes are seldom overthrown from below, rather they crumble from within, because parts of the elites decide to withdraw their support and turn into opposition. They may topple a president, or they may try to win elections, and they even may organize mass protests, or at least take the leadership of such protests. Examples for this kind of events are, for example, the Rose Revolution in Georgia, 2003, and the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, 2004. And then Belarus, the case first seems to be similar, but Lukashenko still holds on power, and maybe statistics remain right in this case too. But what we don't see here is a visible split of the elites yet. There is no strong leader of the opposition, as there were in Ukraine and Georgia, and yet there are mass protests, not only spontaneous riots, but peaceful demonstrations and other actions, and they have been going on for months, quite violent repressions notwithstanding. This is surprising because mass protests in authoritarian regimes are quite rare, especially when these regimes are not overly fragile. The reason is that it is costly to organize collective action from below. You can be subject to violence, you can even lose your life, and it is uncertain that your efforts will be successful because you don't know how many people are needed on the streets to convince your authoritarian president to quit and step down. So even if the majority of the population were disappointed from the regime, from the economic situation, and wish the regime changed, everybody would face what we call a free rider problem, meaning if everyone else who is dissatisfied takes part in protests, the regime will be overthrown. Okay, but this will be so even if I do not take part. So because everyone thinks so, mass protests will not occur. This is why we always are eager to look closer at cases where protests occur, because they are kind of unlikely. So we have to look closely at the Belarusian case, which we do now. I don't have a final answer, but when we reconstruct the process of mobilization from May onwards, we find some useful clues, I think. My thesis is, since May, we have been observing a self-reinforcing dynamic of events that is the result of unforeseeable individual decisions by individual actors. Maybe you have heard of the so-called butterfly effect in chaos theory. Metaphorically spoken, the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil may set off a tornado in Texas. So small changes in an otherwise stable condition can result in large effects in a later state. So the question is, where are these butterfly wings in the Belarusian case? And to tell a long story in short, I have prepared a slide. Wait a moment, here it is, here it will be in a moment. Here. Oh, do you see it?
Yep.
Yeah, great. The blue events are the unpredictable moves of oppositional actors. The red ones represent Lukashenko's moves, which are all are bad decisions, as we will see. And the black ones stand for expectable effects given these decisions. So in spring, yes, we have economic problems, as Vyacheslav said, and the governance politics on Corona were less than satisfying. Nevertheless, nobody could predict that this time not only the usual rather hopeless alternative candidates for the presidency entered public space, but also new and fresh people, which were especially Viktor Babarika, a former chairman of the board of directors of Belgazprom-Bank, Valery Tsepkala, former consultant of Lukashenko and founder of a large Minsk IT hub. They were advocating moderate economic reforms and addressed relatively broad sections of the population, especially educated and urban voters. By contrast, there was Sergei Tikhanovsky, YouTube blogger, a political newcomer. He rather addressed Lukashenko's traditional electorate, especially people in small and medium-sized cities. And his slogan was, "Stop the cockroach," which picked up a popular Soviet children's book. And at his well-attended events, many people brought their slippers against the cockroach nuisance. So this was very different audiences addressed by the three candidates. And here follows Lukashenko's first decision, which later turned out to be wrong. In May and June, he had these very different challenges to his rule, imprisoned on flimsy grounds, instead of approving them as candidates, which would have been probably general dissatisfaction. What nobody could predict then was Svetlana Tikhanovskaya's decision to step in for her arrested husband. As she recently explained in a video, in an interview, she only learned from her husband's video, which he published on his blog on the day of his arrest, that he prepared to run for the presidency. So she decided to support him. Since she was not accepted as a proxy for her husband when she wanted to submit his documents to the Central Electoral Commissions, she registered as a candidate herself. She said, "I just wanted to show him what is important for you is also important for me." She was absolutely sure that there would be no consequences because she would never be accepted as a candidate. Here she was wrong, again, because Lukashenko was wrong. Lukashenko declared, "Our constitution is not for women because the president has to handle a lot of power." So she was registered as a candidate because he did not perceive her as a threat. So next, butterfly flap. When the other opposition candidates also had been arrested, their campaign managers united. Again, a happy coincidence. The three were female and they acted out of solidarity with the three men they represented. This was a game changer. First, the three women overcame the diversity or even incompatibility of the three original electoral platforms. They formulated a new short-term goal. Tikhanovskaya should be elected, but not as a president, of course, but to organize free and fair elections. Interestingly enough, the long-term goals she formulated in her message to the voters unfolded the idea of the Belarusian model in the same semantics as Lukashenko's ideas about what is good for Belarus. And she said the president had made only empty promises all the 26 years about higher wages and pensions, full employment, and so on. And now truth and justice had to be finally restored. This change of the team changed the very narrative of the electoral campaign. This was really important. Until then, it had been a struggle among men in which the incumbent had resorted to unfair means. So the team of the three women demanded to restore fair play, and they acted like women from the people, not as politicians in the strict sense. They did not push onto the front stage, but just stepped out of the second row as defenders of the brave men who had been badly treated in a rigged game. And this brought a strong note of morale and even honor, I think, to the electoral campaign, which also found expression in new symbols and performative elements. Clear and strong, but less confrontational than the House Liberals against the cockroach. The color white became important as a recognizable color in clothing, bracelets, and flowers. And it also signaled the peacefulness of intentions, and it was one of the two colors of the Belarusian flag of 1918, which began to appear more and more frequently at campaign events. The signature gest of the three women, fist, heart, and victory sign, illustrated their message, believe, can, victory. And this did work. Within days of her registration, Tikhanovskaya managed to gather massive crowds at her allies across the country. Lukashenko's next bad idea was to have a completely unrealistic election result announced on election night on August 9. What was rather expectable were the spontaneous mass protests which followed. Such protests happened also before in a lesser scale in 2006, 2010, and even in 2015. But these protests were swiftly and decisively crushed. And this time, this did not happen. On the one hand, the protests were much bigger than before. And on the other hand, violence was much more excessive. This also turned out to be a bad decision. And the point is, why repressions did work this way. The point is that regimes such as Lukashenko's depend on a certain amount of popular support, or at least of what we call resigned acceptance. Whether violence can stabilize a regime depends on the situation. On the one hand, the fear of imprisonment, physical damage, loss of employment, and so on can cause dissatisfied people to give up. And this was the intention. But on the other hand, repression can even spur mobilization. We know from research that this might be the case when the victims of repression belong to a group that has a strong group feeling and sees the protest as just and the regime's reaction as illegitimate. This is true for these events, as I think. We have, for example, surveys from September which show that most people joined the protests not in the first 3 days, but afterwards, and asked why they did so. 98% say because of violence and political oppression, and only against Lukashenko and electoral fraud. This is only the second and third place in these surveys as a motive. So I think we got some explanation for why Belarusians protests in masses. The chain of events I have outlined led to the emergence of a very strong collective feeling of we, The protest mobilization in the days and weeks that followed the election increased in scale. The group that mobilized was not simply Tikhanovskaya's voters or so, but rather a community in the sense of a family or even a nation. What the white flag stands for. This flag symbolizes at once the leaderlessness of the protest and the rejection of Lukashenko with his flag under the joint roof of the nation against the dictator. And actually, this situation reminds me less the Rose Revolution in Georgia or the Orange Revolution in Ukraine than the GDR in October 1989, when mass demonstrations on a similar scale chanted, "We are the people, no violence, and the country needs new men." In both cases, the people constituted themselves as demos in their confrontation with the political leadership that had failed and claimed their right to political self-determination. The main difference is that the GDR leadership, which also initially used violent repression, soon capitulated because they accepted that they had lost any legitimation. By contrast, Lukashenko has not accepted his loss of popularity to this day. And what we learn from Belarus is how powerful a driver of protest can this strong sense of belonging together against a dictator can be once it has emerged, which is largely due, so I have argued, to a chain of rather unpredictable events and decisions which have been possible, but by no way inevitable or unavoidable. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. And the next speaker is Sehe Bodan. You have to unmute your microphone, please.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for inviting me here. And I have to start with disagreeing with Professor Strykov, because this nice scam is, of course, completely legitimate, but I would add some important details there, which will, in my opinion, change a lot. So first, let's start that unpredictable it is maybe in details, but in general, it was clear that some really big trouble for Lukashenko is coming. It's something which we discussed with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Andrei Kazakevich, who was really amazed how Lukashenko was doing his election campaign this time. It was something which I can put as campaigning with military, campaigning with security personnel, but not doing really any meaningful public performances as he used to do in the past. It means that even before that, I have heard from different people from Belarusian state apparatus that we are going to enter the army, if something. I was really astonished. It was, late spring, and no sign of all these demonstrations that we have today. But then, because I am doing a bi-monthly monitoring of security-related activities, I noticed the dynamics. And dynamics was of involving the army and also activizing other security agencies in political process as never again. These dynamics occurred against another factor, which I would suggest is worth of adding, of being inserted into this scheme. And this is the factor of Russia. The factor of problems with Moscow is something which is clearly dismissed. Dismissed in a very aggressive way, I would say, that normally my attempts to say that, look, the only beneficiary of the developments in strategic terms until now is Putin. And many things which are done, they may be done with good intentions, but they will not bring about democracy in Belarus. They may topple Lukashenko. They may change the name of the next strong man in Minsk, or maybe weaker man in Minsk, but they can very easily lead the country into losing any meaningful statehood, becoming one of these odd polities which exist, many of them exist in the world. They have nominal state institutions. They have no meaningful political autonomy. And they have, of course, no democracy. I can only remember not only of South Ossetia or Abkhazia, there are many. And this is the problem which I would say make the Russia factor being worse of being inserted into this scheme. And you can see a very interesting thing that actually the correlation between confrontation and confrontation in Belarus-Russia relations and the behavior of Lukashenko is also very clear one. Actually, the crisis which we have now in Belarus is created by him, by Lukashenko himself. Because after suppressing any plurality of political opinions, I would put it even so, not only any meaningful participation of citizens in politics. He also didn't stop here. He even didn't allow his own supporters to become organized in a proper way. I can tell you of anecdotes told me by the people from his camp, so to say, how they were not allowed to do anything even on his behalf for his interests as they understood them. Unfortunately, we have now little time. But what I can say is that, of course, he created a very vulnerable polity. And the Belarusian state is very vulnerable. And because of this, when some activists of the protests, somebody like Frank Fechok, are telling again and again, our struggle is not about geopolitics. I can say, yes, I can even say that it would be nice if it wouldn't be, but unfortunately we cannot choose here. Is it about geopolitics or is it not about geopolitics? It is something that we are not free to shape. Simply, we have a country which is very vulnerable towards Russia, which is very dependent on Russia in every aspect. And because of this, anything which happens has something to do with relations with Russia. And what does it mean? That I can say now I see that many activists, many structures supporting the protests, they try to do opposite of what they did after Crimea, with regard to Ukraine and other such events. They try to sideline anything which has to do with Russia. Let's remember two clear cases. In September, we had unprecedented military exercise in Belarus. Slavic Brotherhood 2020. I can only invite you to look for any traces of description of this unprecedented exercise in Belarusian oppositional media or discussion of it among activists. But the exercises that not only quadrupled, so they became suddenly 4 times bigger than planned after the visit by Minister Shoigu to Minsk and after some very suspicious political talks. They also involved, for the first time ever, the flight of 2 more VDV battalions from 1,500 kilometers. Their sudden landing on the borderland of Ukraine and Poland and entering, so to say, battlefield. They also involved, for the first time ever, deployment of Russian strategic aviation, strategic land force, strategic air force in Belarus when Russian strategic bombers made some exercises, and also other Russian strategic Tu-160. They flew alongside along the borders of Russia. So what I mean to say is that that's one example. Another example is also how the issue of a possible Russian military intervention in Belarus was discussed. All signs of Russia amassing forces on the border with Belarus in August, they were very consistently sidelined, denied, dismissed by Belarusian oppositional media and Belarusian oppositional activists, many of them. They simply said, no, these photos of Russian military trucks in Smolensk Oblast, they are definitely not true. They are not really important. Unfortunately, they were really true. And I would say that this denying of geopolitical reality, of geopolitical aspects of this crisis is very dangerous. Unfortunately, it continues. And in another example of such dangerous line, and I will stop here, it is how the question of sanctions is discussed. I am sorry, but any sanctions of general nature, for example, today the theme is cutting Belarus out of SWIFT system, cutting Belarus out of international banking system. Any such sanctions, I don't mean the sanctions against Lukashenko or the persons involved and responsible for some specific actions. These sanctions, of course, are legitimate, and we cannot say they endanger Belarusian statehood. But any other sanctions of general nature, especially involving economics, they are only and only pushing the country to Putin. Because, of course, the Belarusian regime can really very easily compensate all these problems by going to Putin. And he will be happy to oblige. Unfortunately, again, we are said it's not so, but what can I say? That everybody who was studying sanctions against all kinds of regime, I did it on the example of Iran, can tell you that the only consequence of sanctions it was never never toppling the regimes or democratizing countries. It was only undermining the future of these countries. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much and for your presentation. And so we could now have a discussion in our panel first. I mean, the contradiction between you both was evident, and you even announced it, so Petra could have an answer to that.
Okay. I didn't talk about the outcome because there is not yet an outcome of the protests. I did about the organization of protests, which is by itself a puzzle, because given the situation, and everybody knows that, including the geopolitical situation, this was not so likely that people would go in such masses into the streets this time. The outcome, I'm afraid you're right. The outcome will not be democracy. This is the least likely outcome. More likely will be the end of relative stability and certainty. And I'm not an optimist, actually. So I don't see a big contradiction between us concerning this one, but I didn't talk about it. And I agree that Lukashenko's campaign itself was a bad campaign or a bleak campaign or so, and that part of why he is holding on power until now is that he changed. Since spring, he changed the most important key positions in his apparatus for security people. So he actually has now the power. This is true. He has the power to hold on by violent means, and we don't see a split. We don't see a split into the elites. We don't see that security forces will give up loyalty or so, which was the case in GDR. This is why I cite GDR. Because there, the party had no were doubting that the security forces would stay loyal to them, so they give up. So this is a big difference. And just to remind you, the demonstrations in the GDR ended with the dissolution of the GDR, which also has to do with the geopolitical situation. So this is, and what changed there was that we are the people into, oh, we are one people. And this solved the geopolitical situation. The Eastern Germans decided that they are just Germans, and so the problem was solved. And this is the interesting point, because we also have Belarus is also at the front, so to say, or in the midst of this geopolitical rivalry between the European Union and Russia. Where I don't agree with you is that Putin is a beneficiary of this situation. This is what I don't see, actually. I see that Putin is not really strongly in intervening into the situation. He has this Lavrov visits and so on, and he seems to pressure on Lukashenko to do something, especially a constitutional reform, which is to gain, I think, time to make the process a bit, to gain time for an orderly transit of power to another person. And of course, Putin will be interested, and he will work on that the next president will be Russia friendly, but I don't see that Russia has any big benefit from an unstable Belarus. I see that Russia is has big troubles with the near abroad, so to say. Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, all are unstable, and at present time, we see that they do not act very assertively, neither in Armenia, nor in Kyrgyzstan, nor in Belarus. It could be worse. they don't do that. And the same is the European Union. We could blame the European Union for not supporting the opposition stronger with more sanctions, with more effective sanctions. But it seems to me that both powers, the EU and Russia, perfectly understand that this is a problem. This would be a big problem to aggravate the situation in Belarus, that Belarus would end as Ukraine ended, which is not a big benefit for Putin, neither for the European Union. And the problem is that this geopolitical situation you can't change. You can't change it. And I think this is the opposition doesn't speak about this or tries to take the geopolitical aspects somewhere out of this, because they also know the problem, let alone that they might be not of the same, there might be different positions how to behave. So I mean, this is a potential split factor for the opposition, and this is dangerous for Belarusian stateness, and that's true. This is the case. So, and I don't think that that Russia is so. Yeah, this is where I don't agree with you. Putin is not happy about the situation. I'm sure of it.
Okay. Thank you so much. May I ask Vyacheslav to comment on that? I mean, Petra and Serhej, they had a discussion about mistakes which were made, and your talk was more about economy, that economy is, it's economy stupid, so to say, that it's all decided by economic crisis. So what is your comment on the two papers?
Well, I mean, I would rather avoid commenting on the political developments purely because, as you've noticed, yes, I stick to that line that at the end, I mean, ultimately we have this economic problems, but in Belarus, it's also important to keep in mind the social context, because Lukashenko has been in power, could have been in power, was in power for so long, mostly because of this social contract, as they say in political science. I mean, there was a kind of trade-off between the political freedoms and social rights in terms of access to social infrastructure, which was inherited from the socialist period and which was upheld by Lukashenko. I mean, no one could blame him for closing schools, for closing hospitals, or for shutting off the pension system or breaking it apart. I mean, he didn't do much in terms of reforms because of his negative stance to neoliberalism, to shock therapy, to Washington institutions, to all this Western conspiracy, you know, in his eyes. Yes, but what he did, he basically tried to uphold what he inherited in terms of the infrastructure from the Soviet period. And that's very important because when you talk to any Belarusian man or woman, like especially working age and including especially the retired people, they are scared about the future in terms of not just money making, like wage earning, but also access to social facilities. Because, I mean, this is kind of implicit, but they think what was going to happen if someone else comes to power, what's going to happen to the social infrastructure. They understand it's kind of weak, yes, because of underfinancing, chronic underfinancing, because of lack of external support, like in the Soviet period, it was from Moscow. Now people would have expected from the Eurasian Union or from the Union state, but it doesn't come. At the end of the day, Belarusians are left to like keep to what they have by their own means. And many are afraid to lose even this, like the basic subsistence level of, especially now in this pandemic, you know, which aggravated all issues and put like this non-economic issues like health, life at the forefront of any discussion. I mean, people are really scared. And this political instability just adds to this depression, like national depressions. I mean, I recently talked to one of my former PhD students in Minsk, and he was unfortunate to have a mental collapse a month ago. But he said just one thing, you know, that clinics dealing with psychological situations, like special clinics, their waiting lists are stretched until April. I mean, if you want to have like a psychiatric advice from a medical personnel, I mean, you need to wait for so many months, which is for Belarus, I mean, sounds kind of ridiculous. I mean, we have a lot of problems, but we never dealt with such a massive. I mean, I'm not sure, but it sounds quite interesting. So I mean, it's just to sort of underline this social context as well, because I think politics is the outcome of this more deep undercurrents. And of course, in Belarus, you don't have politics in its classic sense. It's just one man, a politician. So you can speculate about his intentions or misintentions, his whatever he does, but it's not politics that we talk in, let's say, in the West or in Germany or elsewhere, even in Russia.
May I? I have a question.
Yeah,
a question to Vyacheslav. Do you think that the social contract and the Belarusian model could survive without Lukashenko, or is this a personal project and it is gone when he has to go?
I mean, I'm very much skeptical about it, because I think, I mean, once he's gone, Belarus will have to, I mean, it will be pushed somehow to undertake the same reforms which were undertaken by other countries. And at the top, we would have this reform of the public sector. And in the post-communist world, it means technically just one thing, privatization. And when it's privatized, you just look what Russia is, what Ukraine is, and I mean, it's a Pandora box. Literally, it's going to be a Pandora box.
So it would be better if Lukashenko.
I'm not saying that. I'm just. saying.
I mean, I understand. We have this problem with Sergei also that there will be change, and it will not be to the better side, at least in the short run. I would say this.
I mean, what I say, it's not going to be like Ukraine even. Because in Ukraine, even before 2004, they had privatization, just like in Russia in the 90s. And Lukashenko is unique, I mean, among all post-communist countries, that he didn't let that kind of privatization happen. And that means that Belarus is unique. I mean, what happens to him basically means what happens to Belarus in terms of political economy unfolding. You're just going to see.
Well, I have one question to you all. Does Lukashenko still exist in terms of autonomous political figure? I mean, there's no doubt that there are media advisors from Russia. And of course, he plays a certain role. And it seems to me that this role is defined by Russia. We even do not know whether these images with Lukashenko in a helicopter and a gun, this might be an inscenation made in Moscow and not by Lukashenko himself.
It looks like, yeah, but honestly, I think Lukashenko is trying to play it like to sit on so many chairs that sometimes he's lost, or he appears to be lost, especially in the last few months, like starting from August, basically. I mean, as I was already mentioned, I mean, this election outcome and this reaction, I mean, it's just something which hasn't been seen in Belarus. But what many people in Belarus saw is a very different Lukashenko at different times. Yeah, I mean, he was much more eccentric when he just came to power in the 90s. The difference now is that at that time, we didn't have the media so developed as we have now. And it wasn't so much recorded and broadcast and commented. And of course, we didn't have Telegram channels, we didn't have Skype, we didn't have Facebook in the 90s. Very few people used electronic mail, yeah. I was one of the first maybe in Belarus to set up American email account in 1996. But now, I mean, people are so advanced in that sense that it looks very much different, and it is. But then you have to compare to other experiences in the world, and I think one of the good experiences I mean, of course, it's not the same region, but look at what happened in Egypt in 2011, this so-called Egyptian revolution. And what was the outcome of that Egyptian revolution? Was it something good or something bad? I mean, it's just a speculation, of course, but people always think that Belarus is unique. It's not unique in political economy. It's unique in a sense that it stopped something which was unfolding elsewhere. But then again, it was just trying to win time without serious reforms of a different kind. Like Lukashenko could have done much more in terms of supporting, let's say, high-tech industries, in terms of supporting different kind of agriculture and trying to win some niches in the world. He didn't do that. He was just trying to basically stick to what he inherited, and he missed a lot of opportunities in that sense. And now it looks like he's lost. Yeah.
Well, one provocation. I mean, it looks like that he has done everything wrong, but the transformation has not been realized, and so on. But if you have a look at the immigration numbers, Belarus, I think Belarus has about 9% of the population who emigrated. And Lithuania and Latvia, they have 20%. And this can be a criteria maybe also.
Yeah, but to me, again, if I try to focus on political economy, we have this low immigration mostly because of Lukashenko trying to stick to industrialized mode of economy. I mean, as I already mentioned elsewhere, it's like a difference between Marshall and Morgenthau plans for Germany after the war. With Morgenthau plans, I think Germany would be a different country, if at all a country, a nation. The same with Belarus. Belarus opted for sticking to industrial model of economy, of course, archaic, of course, inefficient in a modern sense, but still good enough to keep people where they are employed with some sense of being employed, with some kind of qualifications, with some stability, with a sense of doing something more meaningful than just going somewhere to wash dishes or look after young or old people, you know. I mean, and that's you have to keep in mind. If that kind of model is overthrown, you would expect that Lukashenko may end up. I mean, not Lukashenko, Belarus will end up like another kind of like a Moldova or Georgia or whatever. Just people would lose jobs, and we are talking about a lot of people. I mean, many already lost a lot of jobs. I mean, industrial employment used to be close to 2 million in Belarus, and now it's less than 1 million. So, I mean, you need to have another like a shock or something to have this million gone. And what would happen to these hundreds of thousands of workers? I mean, basically they would go out of the country unless someone's ready to pay for their benefits. But then we are talking about billions every year. And I'm not sure there are countries willing to support dole seekers in Belarus at that extent, you know, because it's going to be a lot of people, quite a lot of people. Yeah.
Okay, there are quite a lot of questions from the audience, and we could open, if maybe if you, Petra, or you say, if you want to answer to Vyacheslav, you could do this, or we could open up the floor. Yeah. So could I ask you, Felix, to moderate the discussion with the audience?
May I add some comments?
Yeah, please go ahead.
You know, I would like to make maybe 2 or 3 points. First of all, that now we shall not dismiss all the history of Belarus after Lukashenko came to power as complete failure. I would say that in many spheres we can see very clear achievements. And simply the problem is that with the polarization today, you cannot discuss anything, and this polarization, as a result, it deepens. Because again, as Professor Stykov said, we cannot say split in security forces. I say first, oppositional structures contributed a lot to avoiding this split because of demonizing, in many cases, any uniformed men and women. And it was definitely not smart tactics. And I would say that, like many things in this election, it doesn't look for me in many cases as spontaneous as we are told it is. But back to the thing, first I would say that about split in security forces, it's a very moot point. Because I think that before asking Putin for help, Lukashenko tried hard, and we can see some signs of it, tried hard to do it with own security forces, and it failed. And then also implicitly they made clear that they tried to consider a martial law. And I think the problem was that martial law looked for them as a more dangerous option because they were not so sure about the army. Why so? Because if we look at some facts, at the fact that for example, the former commander of the 38th Brigade in Brest joined the protesters with some other veterans of the same brigade. And this brigade is one of core units of the Belarusian army. Very good supplied, very good trained. And when their former commander behaves like this, then there are questions. And these questions are a mess because after this, we had, for example, only in recent weeks, we had not only a former soldier of one of the most demonized by opposition media unit, the unit 3214, it was demonized through all these years. But the former soldier of them appeared to be oppositional activist, and he was murdered. I mean, Roman Bondarenko. And so then are the questions: why to demonize these people if you see these facts? Or the last, for example, now the former OMON commander and also employee of Presidential Security Service was tried and convicted, I think, in Mogilov to years in prison because of participating in the protest. So I mean that this picture of split or not split, it is for me a very moot point. I'm not so sure. I'm quite clear. I'm quite sure that they wanted to have martial law as a solution, but they didn't dare. So sorry for speaking too long, but one very brief point. Again, I don't know how we can say that Putin is not beneficiary if we see very clear rise in Russian military presence and Russian military activities in Belarus, of which I can I have said you about the exercise in September. I can add also many other specific cases. For example, when Belarus goes and buys now extremely expensive military hardware from Russia, which it didn't want to buy for years. And Belarusian generals explicitly said, we don't want this BTR-82. We have our own things to use, we don't need them. Now they go and buy it when the country has no money we go and buy it. Why? I say, for me, it's clear, because they have to make concessions. And these concessions, for me, show that even in terms of funds, for Russia, it is, I mean, for the Kremlin, I don't think that for Russia as a whole, it's a good situation. For the people of Russia, it's a good situation. I say that, like in Latin America, all this United Fruit Company and all other companies, they undermined the statehood of Latin American countries to the benefit of nobody but themselves, and undermines the relations between Latin America and United States and ordinary Americans. The same was happening for years and is happening in Eastern Europe because of Russian oil and gas companies, which were also involved in all these developments in Belarus for years. And I say that, again, we don't want to discuss it, unfortunately.
Thank you very much for this very clear statement. Should we open the floor now? I think so.
Okay.
Felix, could you moderate the discussion here?
Yeah, the first question was from Daria Fabianic. I would just give you the permission to speak through Zoom, and you can ask a question yourself, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. It was already quite mentioned from the panelists that the elites are still behind Lukashenko, and as long as they are behind him, there won't be any change. And also, this is the unique thing on this protest is that there is no clear leader in the opposition makes this so special, and it makes the kind of the endurance of these protests as well, because people see we don't need actually a leading person to organize ourselves, so they are having all kinds of events and organize themselves. So it's also kind of developing the civil society in the country as well. What my worry is, by this self-organization of not having a clear leader, this kind of is prolonging this deadlock in the conflict. And I'm wondering, is there actually a possibility of change as long there is no clear opposition leader? And if there's a possibility of an opposition leader to exist if it's not supported or approved by Kremlin? So is actually change without support of Russia and a clear opposition leader possible? Yeah, that would, it's to all panelists, so whoever wants to answer.
Yeah, Petra.
Maybe I begin. I think we have to collect some arguments. The first thing is, I think this is not a conscious decision of the protesters not to have a leader. So this is things happen or do not happen. We have lots of leaderlessness protests in an age of digitalization, because it's technically more easy now to organize via internet networks, social networks. So there is less need in a leader for organizing a protest. It's not the leader who has to be the symbol and the coordinator and so on. We have this scene from Russia that maybe there are some protests are not taken over by leaders because leaders are afraid that they lose because the protests might be not successful by themselves. So there is a kind of reluctance to be a leader. Here in this case, we have, in the end, we have Tikhanovskaya, who came to be the leader by chance, and who matured a lot, and he was very impressive as a person who stands for what for honest, and I don't know what, for a better Belarus and so on, but she is not a politician. So there are people obviously working on her to become a politician, and she changes. We can observe how she changes for week after week, but as the chosen leader or so, she is not really a leader in a classical sense. And other leaders, other potential leaders, sit in the prison until now. Tsepkalo disappeared. He is kind of under. He's kind of there are some. Heißt das jetzt hier? Der wird wegen Steuervergehen gesucht. There is kind of tax
evasion.
Yeah, so he is. I think he disappeared simply and for not to being taken, and I don't see a leader who wants to be the leader. So this is one. This I think is only one, and we know from all the other revolutions that you need a leader at a certain point. At the very least, you need leaders which compete in elections, but elections are not the next step on the agenda because there is nobody who negotiates at the moment about conducting new elections. So this is ahead. There will be leaders. No, this is not the point in time yet. Where leaders will be at the top of the movement, I guess. Please, others. It's a big argument. I think we have to collect other ideas.
Yeah, it's an important feature that we have a very intransparent situation about leaders and structures and projects which are involved in this campaign. From the very beginning, it was actually remarkable. And I say that the policies of also Western structures who said that they are supporting, so to say, political alternative in Belarus is also very remarkable. And I will only cite the case of Alexander Milinkevich, who was really a very good choice as an alternative and as a person who could be supported by various parts of Belarusian society. I mean that it was a guy with a clear background, with abilities as a politician, non-controversial, no some funny or sad facts in his life. What happened to him after quite a good performance, about which Vyacheslav said also before our discussion, in 2006, I expected that he will be developed further because it was quite clear for me under those circumstances, he performed really very good. So you have to develop this political figure to create alternative. What happened to him? Nothing. He was dropped. And
he gave up. This is the point. He gave up.
He gave up because he couldn't get sustainable help from the people who gave him money before that. I mean that he gave up because well, he had to give up, you know. And I think that it was not a good strategy if you would like to create some alternative in that. And the same happens actually after each election, after every election. And that is a problem because the problem in Belarus is not about having one more election. Because of this, what Tikhanovskaya is talking about, it's for me nonsense. To have elections with people with such backgrounds as in this case, with Lukashenko, with Babaryka, and with Tikhanovsky, for me, it's something that is not about democracy. It's about farce. Because given the backgrounds and intransparency of all these people's, all their background per se,
Okay, but how would you choose the next leader if not by election?
I would say that there is an answer to this also tried already by Mr. Hans-Georg Wick, who was appointed as OSCE ambassador to Belarus. I think ambassador, or was he representative, or something like this. And his idea was that, idea of his team, they tried to prepare some kind of transition in terms of preparing first the normal legal framework for functioning of oppositional parties, which will enable oppositional parties to extend their activities and to prepare for normal elections, so to say, to have their networks, to prepare activists, to find some figures to run in the election. And
what does this mean? Postpone the elections for 5 years or so until parties develop, or what is it exactly?
It's not about postponing, it's about preparing. So first of all, it is about forcing the government to talk to the opposition. And I would say that, again, I see it as a feasible option. The people say to me that, no, Lukashenko will never negotiate. I say, first, they could make him negotiate then in the early 2000s. Unfortunately, it didn't succeed, but again, it was, I think, much more about geopolitics than about negotiations. And second, the last point here is that I see that, for example, when only some very limited strikes started, the government was very afraid of them. And I say that now in these protests, in current protests, the successful strategy would be to hold strikes, not to hold all these marches, which bring nothing but repressions and nothing more, and confrontation and all this destabilization without any outcome.
Okay. We still have a lot of questions, Felix, could you go on?
Yeah, the next question is from Maximilian Fixe. I'll also give you the permission to speak.
Thank you. Okay. Do you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, thanks a lot again for this interesting discussion. My question concerns Russia, and I was wondering, do you see a possibility for Putin to change strategies towards Belarus after deciding to support Lukashenko?
Do you want to address your question to a specific?
For maybe Professor Styko, because you were talking earlier about Russia and the role of Russia.
Yeah, but I feel as if my position about what Putin wants or does not want is kind of not shared by my Belarusian partners. I would rather move the question to our Belarusian colleagues. Actually, in my idea is that Putin is interested in stabilizing the situation. He has had problems with Lukashenko. They are seemingly pressuring on him to have at least some kind of constitutional reforms and kind of transfer of power into the near or middle range future. And that obviously every new president of Belarus has to be tolerable for Russia, but this is not so hard to achieve even, and I think this is not, there's no need to make an open occupation or so efforts to Belarus for having such a president who is Russia friendly, say it that this way. So, but I'm afraid that this is not your position. So maybe it's more interesting to hear yours.
May I comment on that? Yeah, thank you. Regarding Putin, Russia, Belarus conundrum, I think I mean, many people would would disagree with me, but from the political economy perspective, I see Putin himself as a guardian of the oligarchs, basically. I mean, it's maybe not very popular, but there is a debate in Belarus now pushed through different media that Russia is interested in the transformation of Belarus political architecture. I mean, basically for the sake of securing a more efficient kind of means of influence on Belarus in terms of economy, in terms of getting hold of assets it always wanted to get hold. I mean, it's not just pipes. It also some refineries, some other infrastructure like telecommunications, let's say IT and other things, privatization of the social sector, even for experimental reasons, because Belarus is still like a kind of a Soviet museum in the eyes of many of those who are in the Forbes list. And there are 101 individual there, basically with the wealth of a property of 1 billion and over. And that's quite important to keep in mind. When Putin came to power in 1991, I checked it a few days ago. Forbes didn't have anyone from Russia in their lists. So all this 101 appeared, well, you could say thanks to him. And what you see in Belarus, I mean, he's maybe trying to sort of kind of change Belarus, not just by replacing an individual and by another individual who can exploit all that political system that was created by the 1996 referendum, so-called. So he's trying to change that kind of architecture to make sure that no one is going to be like that individual, so that Belarus is going to be just a playground like many other post-communist countries, even in the Soviet Union. I can mention Kyrgyz Republic, for example. Everyone knows that it's the most democratic Central Asian post-Soviet republic, but as a observer, or OECD observer of 2015 Kyrgyz elections, I can tell that, well, so what? You know, they have how many 100 or 400 political parties. Every family or clan is proud to have a political party. And then when it comes to elections, it's just a big show, you know, basically. So, when you just see how Russia influences Kyrgyz politics in many indirect ways, just to think of a similar scenario for Belarus as the outcome of this deadlock, what we have now. So, but it's just speculation, of course. I mean, on the other hand, you see Putin in the short term being probably unhappy with Lukashenko's removed brutally, because many people, like ordinary people, would think that that's the fate that it expects him himself. So, I mean, you can think of Putin like in different perspectives, in short term, medium term, and long term. In the short term, of course, he's not interested probably in brutal removal of Lukashenko, but in the long term, he may be quite happy about it. Just, but under different conditions, under different circumstances, and at the end of the day, to sort of push the same model in Belarus that has been developing in Russia, the neoliberal model. And that's where I finish for now.
Yeah, definitely, I would agree now with Vyacheslav. I think that Putin is only concerned now with the mood of removal, with the kind of removal of Lukashenko, because of course the demonstration effect in this case will have, because of links between Belarus and Russia, this demonstration effect for Russia is many times, I think, bigger than the demonstration effect of revolutions in Ukraine. Nothing to say about Kyrgyzstan or like this. Because when the government is toppled in Kyrgyzstan, for ordinary Russians, oh, okay, it's somewhere in Central Asia, well, nothing to expect. In Ukraine, it was a different case, but still, But in Belarus, it means that, hey, if they did it in Minsk, we will do it here. And here, I think it's the only thing. And I think that one of the most difficult myths, I would say, for me, it is the myth of Lukashenko being a man of the Kremlin. I would say that for me, it's quite clear that Lukashenko, if he ever was, he long ago stopped to be a good choice for the Kremlin. And I would say that by the late 2000s, the Kremlin already started to think about removing him. Why I'm talking so? Because I can cite you very interesting cases of the contacts between the Belarusian opposition and Moscow. Either the Kremlin itself, or the corporations which are known to be close to Putin's leadership. I mean, for example, Gazprom. And just to bring you, to give a flavor, so to say, when after the election in 2010, an editor of very radical Belarusian oppositional website, Charter 97, had problems to flee Belarus, she contacted Mr. Surkov. Mr. Surkov helped her flee the bloody Belarusian regime. I would say if I would have problems, I don't have number of Surkov. And many of my oppositional friends in Belarus, they have to stay in Belarus and to survive there, because they couldn't call Surkov in 2011. They cannot do it today. Of course, today Surkov is not so famous. Maybe somebody has forgotten who was Surkov. Surkov was so to say, famous. Well, he was rumored to be, so to say, the best assistant of Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. So I mean that for me, it's clear that also in terms of socio-economic model, as Vyacheslav has taught already, Belarus is complicated and not really acceptable to Russia as much as it is not acceptable to the West, I would say, only in other terms, maybe contrary one. For the West, it is because it's not liberal enough. For Putin's regime, because it's not corrupt enough, because everything belongs to one man, and you cannot really, well, run it as it is in Russia. But yeah, so I mean that in these terms, but also in many other, and I would say that again, in security terms, for me, it's clear since the early 2010, and especially after Ukraine, Russia simply decided that to trust Lukashenko, it's not a good option for it. And to bring the last point here, I would say that when Putin, in a very stupid way, I would say, because I cannot imagine a really influential and smart politician, not only in the West, but also, for example, in China, who would talk like this, but Putin would, and he had said us that, yeah, Russia has no allies. Russia has, as our Tsar Alexander III said, Russia has only two allies. It's the fleet, the navy, and its army. And I would say, to hear this for Nazarbayev in Kazakhstan or for Lukashenko in Minsk, it is, so who we are not allies. So I would say that this is the mindset of the current Russian leadership. And I would say that this current Russian leadership, by these policies, has run Russia to the ground, and has also run the Belarusian-Russian relations to the ground. And in this crisis, I cannot imagine any constructive role for the rulers in Kremlin to play. But unfortunately, they are playing a very big role. And I would say that it is a big, big elephant in the room, which shall be discussed every time we are talking about current crisis in Belarus.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are running out of time, and therefore my proposition is to collect the questions we still have and then to have one round of answers from you. Would that be okay?
There's actually only one more question here now from Martino Zanaska.
Okay, I didn't know.
Martino, do you want to ask your question? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, thank you very much for your discussion first. And second, my question is, because I asked this question first because none of you has not even mentioned once the pandemic, not the COVID-19 pandemic. So my question is, how relevant was and is the pandemic for the development of the protest, and how could development in the pandemic have an impact on it? And it's asked to all of you because I'm interested in the different perspectives, in the different ways to look at the pandemic.
Maybe try to keep your answers short in the interest of time.
May I start? Oh, okay, Petr.
No, start you.
Okay, thanks. Just briefly, I think the pandemic was just like the last drop in the perfect storm, basically, because as I already keep to my line, it's been accumulated. It's been accumulated. The protest, just because it is a protest. I mean, I would disagree with the with your Petr labeling of it's a revolution, because I don't see classes behind that revolution. I mean, I just see protesters, you know. And when it's a revolution, it should be a revolution of Werner Sombart kind, like a socialist revolution or capitalist.
It's a matter of definition, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I think pandemic was just for for Trump, you know, the unfortunate trigger of the protests, and in general, it just added to that kind of sense of gloom and doom for many people, including even those who didn't support the protest, because it's just an extra worry to think about, and even if they don't participate in the protest, they worry about the spread of the infection because of the protest, of the overwhelming of the social services, especially the healthcare services. It's a very important issue, but it's like not discussed openly in the media or with regard to the political developments, but it is there. But of course, for the protesters themselves, I think the pandemic was just like a perfect weapon against Lukashenko, an extra weapon, basically. They had already many weapons, but from the moral perspective, that there's just like in America, you know, maybe Trump would have survived, but the pandemic happened, and no one expected that America would top the list of the worst casualties of the pandemic, you know. But we see the figures, and we know that it's true, you know. The same in Belarus, you know. But the reaction that Lukashenko chose against the pandemic, of course, may have contributed even more to the sense of doom and gloom. And I mean, I would say again that it's just a perfect storm, and the pandemic is one of the clouds, you know, in the skies, I mean, extra flashing, without which maybe it would have developed a little different way.
I completely agree. I would just add that there may be another dimension, at least in Minsk. The neoliberal, so this so-called neoliberal reactions of Lukashenko against the pandemic, the not closing of anything, provoked a counter-reaction. People got unsatisfied because it became dangerous and so on. And there are observations that there were hundreds of initiatives from below to bring food to doctors, to bring masks and equipments. And so I guess this is was a small, or maybe even not so small, chance of collecting this experience of self-organization. So this is kind of empowerment of civil society, at least in Minsk, at least somewhere, I think.
I think it was like testing these new channels of
and this is experience they could build on later on, I think. Mm-hmm.
3 points. First, I don't, well, in some, I don't think that we can see here any evidence-based case now for a pandemic being a powerful factor behind these developments, although the pandemic really is a reality in Belarus as well. And 3 points here. First, I think that the opposition has lost many quite clear moral cases which it could make against Lukashenko's regime, but it didn't. And one of them is, of course, pandemic, because it's not position of you to criticize Lukashenko for pandemic, for his policies on the virus, and then hold mass rallies, such events, celebrate collective festivities, sharing of food, water, etc. So it's a kind of very odd position, I would put it so. Although this would be a strong case of opposition gaining an upper moral ground. But unfortunately, it was its choice, so to say. The activists chose to do like this. It's not the only case. It's the same as to answer with why on the regime why. I would say that when Yermoshina told that Lukashenko has won with all these fantastic numbers, a moral ground for the opposition would be to gain by saying it's a lie. We need new election, and not pretending that, yeah, but Tikhanovskaya has, and then put some, also another fantastic number. The truth is that we don't know. But back to the pandemic, second thing also that the pandemic is, of course, a very harsh reality in Belarus. And although the country has lost a lot in all terms, we cannot say that there is a massive mortality. I am now currently today in Berlin. I have been in Belarus in all this time regularly for a long time, and I didn't see any such signs. It was hard, it was difficult, but there was no mass mortality. And the third point, maybe good to end with it, I would say that you shall look at that we say that it was unpredictable. It's not now, I'm not now criticizing Professor Stukov, of course, Stukov. It's only, it's maybe even more criticizing of myself. So I'm sorry if it sounds like this, but it's not meant like this. I mean only, yeah. So I mean that I felt that something is in the air in the spring, but before long, a couple of weeks ago, I had to check the old news, and I found a news from 19th of December 2019. And the news was about Lukashenko signing a new plan for defense of the country. And in the text, it was about plan of defense. But then I looked at the photos. And I think that some subversionary photographer put these pictures there. Because if you take these photos and enlarge them, you can read that alongside plan for defense of the country, and it's clearly only military document, there are two other documents on which you can read. One of them is order for preparing of introduction of martial law, And the second one is plan for introduction of martial law. I mean, these two documents were not mentioned in this news and in this piece of news, and they were never mentioned anywhere. But somebody put this photograph there. So I mean that for the regime, they have prepared such harsh measures back then. And there was no pandemic and et cetera, et cetera. And they decided to run it on so to say, violent way, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you so much altogether for all of these fresh informations and insights. I learned a lot also about political science. I didn't know that it is so poetic to speak about butterfly wings. That was very nice. Yeah, so thank you so much. And I think we will have a follow-up webinar sometimes about Belarus, and let's hope that the development will be better than some of our pessimistic views indicated. Okay, have a nice evening and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.